Okay, you guys hear me okay? Well, happy Sabbath, and of course, Happy New Year. As Danny mentioned earlier, I know many of you were expecting to hear Pastor Dwayne today for the New Year's, and as you may have heard, we had a little COVID outbreak in our church, and he unfortunately has COVID. So unfortunately, you're stuck with me today. I'm not Dwayne Lemon, so I will do my best, and hopefully we can all have a blessing together. Let's open with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this day and for your many blessings. I especially want to ask you in this new year to be with our church, Lord, that we will have a new commitment to you, and that as this new year goes along, that our church will grow in strength and in spirituality, Lord. I especially also want to ask you to be with the people who are ill, especially Pastor Dwayne. You know, they have COVID, and that they are feeling a little under the weather, but we know that you are the master healer, and you can touch each of their lives with your healing touch. So be with them, and bless the rest of our congregation today as we worship together. In your name I pray, amen. So I wanted to start off my sermon here today by showing you a quick little video, okay? So it's a video actually of an experiment, and what it's doing is tracking your ability to visually track something, okay? So watch carefully, and basically what you're going to do is count the number of times this team in white on the screen passes the basketball, okay? So just pay close attention. Now, if you've seen this video before, don't give it away. Here we go.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the Moonwalking Bear?
Those who actually saw it, you might be looking at your other congregants and saying, well, how'd you guys miss that? It's so blatantly obvious, right? Well, the experimenters, so the psychologists who did this, just so you guys don't feel too bad, when they did this experiment, about 70% of the people missed the dancing bear. And when they looked further into the data, there was something interesting that came out. The people who missed the dancing bear, most of them got the correct number of passes, okay? The people who actually saw the bear, a majority of them actually got the incorrect number of passes. Okay, so you hear what I'm saying? So what is that telling us? What is that telling us? It's basically telling us that when we are fixated on something else, it is really easy to miss something right in front of your face, something really obvious, you know? It could be something blatant, and we may not see it because we are so fixated on something else. And so I want to talk about a story in the Bible where someone in the Bible got so distracted by something else, they missed something really blatantly obvious. And so if you have your Bibles, please open to Numbers chapter 22. Numbers chapter 22. And we're going to start in the first verse here. And it says basically, then the Israelites traveled to the plains of Moab and camped along the Jordan River across from Jericho. Now Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was terrified because there were so many people. Indeed, Moab was filled with dread because of the Israelites. So we have kind of this setting the stage for this story. You have the Israelites marching across the plains of Moab through Moabites' territory, and the Moabites are just very terrified. Now, why are they so scared? Because we know from the previous chapter that the Israelites actually had just had a huge battle with the Amorites and had conquered them. But if you look at the map, actually, let me show you the map of this area. I don't know if you can see it well, but where they were camped was way up right around there, okay? Where was Moab? So Moab's way down here. They had marched way through here, okay, to get there. So actually, the Israelites had already passed through most of the territory of Moab. And the only reason why actually that the Israelites had destroyed the Amorites was because the Amorites actually attacked them. They had no intention of harming any of these countries at this time. They weren't threatening them. And the only reason why the Moabites were scared was because of this large army, okay? And it just is a lesson for us that we often make really bad decisions when we are afraid of something. We often do something really kind of foolish sometimes when we're scared, because the Israelites were actually not threatening Moab. So what happens here next? So Balak, the son of Zippor, who was the king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to summon Balaam, son of Beor, who was at Pethor near the Euphrates River in the native land. Balak said, a people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the land and have settled next to me. Now come and put a curse on these people because they are too powerful for me. Perhaps then I will be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. So we have here our first introduction of the central character of this story, right? We have this guy Balaam. And a key question is, who was Balaam? What do we know about him? Well, we do know limited things, but there are several things we do know. First of all, he was not an Israelite. He was actually from Mesopotamia. Okay, so Mesopotamia was this area in between modern-day Kuwait and Iraq. Okay, so he really had no significant contact with the Israelites. Okay, well, what else do we know? Number two, he was actually a faithful follower of God. Well, how do we don't know that? That's from the third point, which was he was actually a prophet of God. So the Jewish Talmud actually says that he was one of 7 non-Jewish prophets of God, okay? And we know from later in the story that he had regular communication with God. He knew God's voice. He knew what it sounded like. He had regular instructions from that. And I found this kind of very interesting because, wasn't the Israelites supposed to be the chosen people of God? Wasn't that the vessel that God was using to communicate to the rest of the world? So why was he talking to Balaam? What was he doing talking to Balaam? Why even talk to Balaam? It kind of reminds me of a story I heard recently that explains why God would talk to Balaam in this way. And it comes from a story that I heard recently about a tribe in the Philippines. They're called the Olongan tribe. And they are on the island of Mindoro in the Philippines. And so here's a picture of them. It's a very primitive tribe. And basically, they're completely cut off from the rest of the world. They don't have any access to any modern convenience or anything. It's very difficult to get to them. So recently, there were 4 Adventist missionaries that went to this tiny little village, and they trekked in there. And when they got there, they were amazed because what they found was that there was a big hut that the tribesmen said they were using as a church to worship what they called the true God. And so these missionaries said, well, how did this happen? You know, these are tribesmen that are completely cut off. And what they said was, well, there was one tribesman who everyone really respected, and he had a dream. In his dream, he saw a man all in white, and basically where the man in white told him, you must build me a hut as a church to worship me. In addition, he said, well, 4 people are going to come visit you, and they're going to be carrying a black book. Listen to these people because they will teach you more about me, the true God. So it's kind of amazing. Here it is where God is using just some random tribesmen who just happen to be open to God's leading. And because of this tribesman, the whole tribe, their whole heart was receptive for these 4 missionaries when they come. And now this entire tribe is Adventists. They're worshiping Adventists. So what does this demonstrate as far as Balaam is concerned? I mean, clearly God uses whoever he has available to reach people who are unreached. God was clearly using Balaam for the non-Israelites in the community, in that area, so that they could, hear some kind of message from God that couldn't come from the Israelites. But that raises a question. I mean, what happened to Balaam? Clearly Balaam was previously a faithful follower of God. He listened to God. He heard God's voice. He regularly communicated with God. And he goes from that to a person who wants to destroy the Israelites. He wants to kill them off. And he doesn't even recognize God's voice in the most obvious way. Well, I think the answer to that question is in the text when we continue to read. So if we go back to our Bibles, verse 6 and 7, it says, this is Balak talking, saying, for I know that whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed. So the elders of Moab and Midian left, taking with them the fee for divination. When they came to Balaam, they told him what Balak had said. Okay? So what were the 2 things that the Moabites and Balak were offering Balaam? There's actually 2 things if you look at those 2 verses. One, they were willing to offer him great honor, right? They look at it, it says, wow, whatever you say happens. If you've blessed someone, they're blessed. If you curse someone, they're cursed. And they were also offering something pretty substantial in our minds, is money, right? This fee for divination. So Balaam was really tempted by these 2 big things. And that's something I think a lot of us can relate to, right? Because it's something that we commonly struggle with. And that has to do with our struggles with our pride and our greed. I mean, how many times have we made bad decisions because of something like that, where someone is really appealing to our pride? Maybe they're being very flattering to us and saying, hey, you're so good at this. Why don't you do this for me? Or maybe we make bad decisions because someone is offering you some easy way to make a quick buck. And that's really what was going on for Balaam. So when these Moabites come to Balaam, this is how Balaam responds. Please spend the night here, Balaam said to them, and I will report back to you with the answer the Lord gives me. Now, does this sound like such a bad thing that he did? Did he really do anything that wrong? If you look at this passage, I think a lot of us will like, this is not such a big deal. Well, if you look at Patriarchs and Prophets, Ellen White clearly explains what this problem was. It says, Balaam well knew that it was his duty to refuse the rewards of Balak and to dismiss the ambassadors. But he ventured to dally with temptation and urged the messengers to tarry with them that night, declaring that he would give no decided answer till he had asked counsel of the Lord. His pride was flattered by the words of the ambassadors. The bribe of costly gifts and the prospective exaltation excited his covetousness. The sin of covetousness, which God declares to be idolatry, had made him a time server, and through this one fault, Satan gained entire control of him. It was this that caused his ruin. So this little mistake that Balaam made, what was he really doing? He was allowing temptation to linger around him, right? He should have said, I can't do this, you guys get out of here, and he would have been fine, right? Because the temptation wasn't there. And that's really what a lot of us do. in our own lives. We know what we want, we know what we desire, and we know that it's wrong, and yet we allow it to kind of linger around, saying, that's not such a big deal if I just allow this to be around me, right? It's not a big deal. And so that was Balaam's problem here. So God that night tells him in a dream, he says, do not go with them. You must not put a curse on these people because they are blessed. Right? So God gave a clear answer to Balaam. So the next morning, what does he tell the Moabites? Go back to your own country, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you. He's almost pouting when he says this. I kind of imagine my kids sometimes in a way that Balaam responds to the Moabites. So the Moabites go back to Balak, and Balak hears what they have to say, and he's not convinced. He thinks, I can still convince him. So what does he do? He says, well, let's let's give him twice as much money. Let's give him twice as much glory. And the Moabites go back to talk to Balaam. And again, Balaam, this is how he responds again. He says, even if Balak gave me all the silver and gold in his palace, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord my God. Now, he should have stopped right there, right? He should have stopped right there and turned them around. But of course, he keeps on going. Now, spend the night here so that I can find out what else the Lord will tell me. He's again making that same mistake of allowing temptation to linger in his mind so that he can maybe have some chance of accepting this money and this honor. So it's a lesson for us, because if we continue to persist in being around temptation and persist in being in sin, God's not going to stand in our way. He's a gentleman. He does not force us to do anything. So God that night gives the command. If the men come to call you, rise and go with them, but only the word which I speak to you, that you shall do. Okay? Now, of course, what happened in the middle of the night? The Moabites thinking, there's no way that Balaam's coming. They get up and leave early in the next morning before Balaam even wakes. Okay? Balaam wakes up and he's eager. He sees an opportunity here. Now, I can claim this prize. God is giving me permission to do that. Okay? And it's interesting because that one little word, if, God was giving him one last chance, saying, follow my command. If the Moabites are not there, you're not to follow them. Okay? But of course, Balaam does not go with that. And so this is what happened. Then God's anger was aroused because he went, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as an adversary against him. And he was riding on his donkey. Now the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, and the donkey turned aside and out of the way, and he went into the field. So Balaam struck the donkey to turn her back onto the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the vineyards, with a wall on this side and a wall on that side. And when the donkey saw that the angel of the Lord, and when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pushed herself against the wall and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall, so he struck her again. Then the angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn either to the right or to the left. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam. And so Balaam's anger was so aroused, and he struck the donkey with his staff. So this is a picture of this. What's going on here? Balaam is so angry at this point because he is about to lose what he really wants. He's about to lose all that money that he thinks he deserves. He's about to lose all that honor and prestige that he's about to get. So he is so fixated on that he doesn't see an angel right in front of him. All he's focused on is basically beating his donkey to get there faster. So finally, what happens? This is kind of the climax of the story, right? The pinnacle of what happens. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" And Balaam said to the donkey, because you abused me, I wish there was a sword in my hand, for now I would kill you. So the donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your donkey on which you have ridden ever since I became yours. To this day, was I ever, sorry, I can't read it so good from back here. Was I ever disposed to do this to you? And he said, no. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand. And he bowed his head and fell flat on his feet. And the angel of the Lord said, why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out to stand against you, because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned aside from me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely I would have also have killed you by now and let her live. So 2 things, amazing things have happened here. Do you see the 2 things that were pretty amazing? The first one's pretty obvious. What's the first obvious one? A donkey is talking. I mean, that's just amazing. It would be kind of like if Ava goes home and Wally jumps on her and says, hi, Ava, how are you doing? You know, she would be so amazed. She'd be shocked, right? But there's a second thing that's even more amazing, I think, in my mind. What's that second thing? Say that again? Okay, that's true, but there's something even more fascinating by this. Balaam talks back. He doesn't even recognize that he's talking to a donkey. You know, he is so angry, he's so upset, he is so anxious about getting to the Moabites that he doesn't even realize he's talking to a donkey. He has one conversation back and forth. You know, and it reminds me, because before you get too critical of Balaam in this situation, let me remind you that most of you did not see a dancing bear at the beginning of this sermon. How many of us are like Balaam, where we are so fixated on our own lives that we don't hear God's voice in our lives? We have our careers. We got to succeed in our careers. We got to get more money. We need to buy a bigger house. We need to buy a new car. Might be even good things. I need to find my future spouse. I need to find, support my kids. I need to raise my kids. These are all good things. But we are so fixated on these things that we miss God's words to us. We miss it every single day of our lives. So what do we do about this? I've thought about this for a little bit, and I want to just offer you potentially 3 potential tips and maybe perhaps hearing God's voice a little bit better. Some of them are sort of obvious, but if we think about it a little bit more, I think it will make a lot more sense if we go through this. Tip number 1, consistent daily morning devotion. Now, that's pretty obvious, right? We should be doing this. The problem with this is that for many of us, and myself included, is sometimes we get in these little ruts where maybe we're not getting as much out of the morning devotion. A few times we read it and we don't get as much out of it, and so it's so easy to skip a day or 2 here, and then all of a sudden we're not even doing it at all. But there's something important about doing it daily, doing it consistently. And the reason for that is because you will find as you push through it, there'll be times when something you read suddenly clicks. Something you read will suddenly pertain to the exact problem you are dealing at that moment. The personal struggle that you're having, it's suddenly saying, Peter, you need to do this. What are you doing? You need to change your ways in this way. It reminds me of a story, actually, I just read in the news. It was probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. There was a guy named Kenyon Wilson. He was a professor of performing arts at the University of Tennessee. And so he decided to do this experiment, he decided to do this thing where he was going to give $50 to one of his students, okay? And the way he was going to do that is he placed the $50 in a locker and had a lock on it, okay? And so it was free for the first student to claim it. And what he did is, in his syllabus, he wrote, I'm giving away $50. It is sitting in locker 52. Here is the combination. So what's the catch? The catch is he didn't tell anyone about the combination or the money, okay? He just put it in the syllabus. At the end of the semester, he went back to the locker, he opened it up, and to his utter disappointment, the $50 were still sitting there. Well, what does that mean? It means that there wasn't a single student in his class that had actually read his syllabus. They hadn't looked through it, because if they had, it would have been very obvious. It was sitting right there in the syllabus. Hey, if there's $50 for you, just come and get it. Okay? How many of us are like those students? We have a syllabus right here, right? We have a syllabus with treasures far greater than $50, and we just are not even using it at all. We are barely using it at all. So the encouraging thing that I want you to do is, if you study this book, you will find amazing treasures for yourself. Tip number 2, patience. Patience. So what does that mean? Well, in Lamentations 3, it says, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him. To the soul who seeks him, it is good that one should wait, hope and wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." So, you know, I heard a sermon recently. Sorry, let me get it right. I want to make sure I get it right. It was by Mark Finley, and he says basically this important thing. He says, "The more important a decision is, the longer you should wait to make it, because it allows time for God's voice to be heard. The more time we give, the less emotional we are about its decision. The longer we wait, the less likely we are to make a rash decision." So a lot of times when we think about how we ask God for things and how we try to listen to God is we're a society of instant gratification, right? We want instant answers and we want instant feedback on our questions. But that's not how God works a lot of the times. Sometimes God waits. So give God time. Give God the ability to answer the questions of your heart in his time. The third tip I have is constant prayer. Okay? It says in 1 Thessalonians 6:18, "Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you." Now notice I didn't say pray daily. It doesn't say pray morning and evening, or even 3 times a day. It says pray without ceasing. Okay, pray without ceasing. Pray constantly. A lot of us might feel like, well, that's not even practical. You know, I can't be on my knees all day long. I can't go running to the closet and praying in the closet every day. Well, if you read, I recently read an Ellen White quote here, which I'm going to show. It says, "We are not always so situated that we can enter into our closets to seek God in prayer. But there is no time or place in which it is inappropriate to offer up a petition to God. There is nothing that can hinder us from lifting up our hearts in the spirit of earnest prayer. In the crowds of the street, in the midst of a business engagement, we may send up a petition to God and plead for divine guidance. As did Nehemiah when he made his request before the king Artaxerxes, a closet of communion may be found wherever we are. We should have the door of the heart open continually, and our invitation going up that Jesus may come and abide as a heavenly guest in our souls." So why is this so important? Because she goes on to say, "Those who preserve their thoughts of God, their own earnest soul longings for purity and grace, but only for certain times and places and occasions, will be overcome by temptation. The thoughts will be impure, the promptings of the natural heart will be fulfilled, and the man will be worsted in the conflict. For he will be drawn away of his own lust and enticed. The injunction of the Savior is, pray without ceasing. The heart is to be continually going out in desire for the presence and grace of Jesus, that the soul may have divine enlightenment and heavenly wisdom." So what is this saying? If we restrict our prayers to the times we typically think of prayer, right? Morning devotions, or before meals, or just before we go to bed, we are opening up ourselves to temptation, because our sinful inclinations just will overcome that. The only way we can do that is to be constantly connected to Christ in prayer, because there's an internal source of power for us every single day. You know, I've actually experienced this in my own lives recently. You know, a few months ago, Calvin gave an amazing sermon and really inspired me about witnessing to other people, right? So, you know, I started, going home and praying, in my morning devotion says, "Lord, please give me someone to witness to. Give me an opportunity." And it is an area that I struggle with. I find it difficult to witness in a secular situation. It's just really hard for me to do that. And honestly, when I was doing that, I didn't notice a big difference. I was like, I was going down through my day, nothing seemed to really change. So a few weeks ago, I actually changed my strategy a little bit. And so what I started doing is every day before I would go see a patient, I would say a quick prayer for that patient and then walk in and talk to them. Every time I talked to a colleague, I would say a quick prayer afterwards and say, please be with that colleague. And it was amazing because all of a sudden, my interactions with my patients seemed to be more meaningful. It seemed to be, opportunities seemed to come about that I didn't see before. In particular, and let me just give you an example. There was about 2 weeks ago, I was on call. It was in the hospital, and I was seeing one particular patient. He was in an intensive care unit, very sick. He had had a really rough course. He had initially come in with a big heart attack, so he had a couple stents put in, and then he had a cardiac arrest afterwards. They had to put him on the ventilator, and then his heart started to fail. After his heart started to fail, they had to put an artificial heart pump to keep his heart going. So really sick, all kinds of drugs and everything were going into him. And he finally started to get better. They got him off the ventilator, they took out the pump, and so he was finally on his way to improving. And that's when I was starting to see him. And as I was about to go in the room, the nurse stopped me and says, oh, patient looks really depressed today. It's like, oh, okay, well, thank you. And so just before I went into the room, I said a quick prayer for him and then walked into the room. And I started to talk to him, and he did indeed look very depressed. And so, I said, well, everything's looking better. You're off all the machines now. The medications we're going to just starting new medications. We're going to get your heart better and everything else. And he kind of nodded his head. He still looked really depressed. And so I said, I don't know if I can't really offer you anything more, but I will definitely keep you in my prayers. And so he kind of gave me a kind of quizzical look, and he said, oh, I can't believe you just said that. And I said, well, why do you say that? He's like, well, I don't think a doctor has ever said that they will pray for me. So I said, oh, well, would you like for me to pray for you right now? And he said, oh, yeah, absolutely. So I took his hand, and I prayed for him. There was nurses in the background. There was respiratory therapists there. And so I just said a quick prayer for him. And he squeezed my head, and he said, thank you very much. I really needed that. So then I walked out and went home. Didn't think too much of it after that. The next morning, I walked in and went into his room, and he wasn't there. So I talked to the nurse, and I said, where's the patient? And she told me, last night, he had a cardiac arrest and passed away. Wow. So it got me thinking, It got me thinking. I said, man, was God using me in that one instant? Thinking, did that my little prayer to him mean the difference between his salvation and his loss? So it just got me thinking more about the opportunities that we are missing every single day. We're missing things every single day because we are not connected to Christ. We're not connected to him at all. So that is why having a constant prayer stream is so important. It makes me humble because I just wonder, at the end of time, when we go there, are there going to be things that God says, look at all the opportunities you missed? I don't want to feel like that, right? Look at everything every time you missed an opportunity. I want to finish off the sermon by showing a short video clip. My wife loves music, and she was a music major. One of her favorite musicians is a guy named Joshua Bell. Some of you, he's a world-famous violinist. He actually was the violinist in this movie, The Red Violin. This is him performing. And it was a very interesting story. So he was, a few years back, he was in Washington, D.C., performing at the Kennedy Center. So packed auditorium, people paying hundreds of dollars to see him perform. And so, of course, he did a beautiful performance. Goes back to his hotel, and the next day he decided to do something a little bit different, okay? So he gets dressed up in common street clothes, he goes down to the local subway station, and he pulls out his $3.5 million Stradivarius, and he starts playing in the subway station, just to see what would happen. And this is what happened. Let me just show you this. So Joshua Bell, he played in that subway for about 45 minutes. In that 45 minutes, 1,097 people passed him by. Only 27 people gave him money. Most did not stay to listen. In total, he made $52. Only 7 people of those 1,097 people stopped to listen to him play. And only one person recognized him. And it got me thinking, like, you know, all these people, I don't know if they realized they were missing one of the, you know, the most, you know, beautiful, best violinist in the world, that they were missing a one-on-one concert by a master. They're so fixated about getting to work in their own lives that they missed this great experience. And just imagine if you're that one person, you saw the lady at the very end, the one person who recognized it. She's going to go home with the story of a lifetime. I saw Joshua Bell in the subway station one-on-one. How many of us are like this, where we are missing a one-on-one experience with Christ because we are so fixated about getting to work or fixated about getting home? I don't want that to happen to any of us. You know, the only way that we can prevent that from happening is having that one-on-one, that daily prayerful experience with Christ. And so that's my prayer for us today, that we will not miss our own personal donkeys talking to us, right? That we will hear God's voice in our lives. So I'd like to close with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for the Sabbath day and for this new year, Lord. And Lord, as this new year starts, help us to see and hear your voice. Help us to always pay attention, to have a constant connection to you, Lord. Help us not to miss opportunities to witness for you, and help us to be your servants in all things. Lord, may this year, 2022, be a year where we recommit our lives to you so that your coming will come that much sooner. I pray for all our church today, and as we leave, be with those who are ill. In your name I pray, amen.